Hi, everyone. Tonight we're going to be workshopping a scope and sequence for systemic and sequential phonics instruction, and it will include assessments. You're going to be designing this yourself using any AI chatbot you prefer. My favorite is Claude. Many people prefer ChatGPT Soft Copilot. You might also rely on Gemini. Any tool of your choosing is fine. I'm going to invite you to rely on the free version if that is useful to you. You might find if you're working with the free version that you need to take this week's class step by step and give it time to rest in between your prompts because it only allows you to input a certain amount of information at once, and that's totally fine. You can break this week's lesson up over a series of days if you need to. And I don't need you to be subscribing to the paid version unless you choose to do that. I personally enjoy using Claude a great deal. It does not train on users' data by default. That means that when you put information into Claude, it is not necessarily infringing on your privacy in ways that other tools might. In addition, Claude is known for not hallucinating as much as other tools do. The information that it offers is usually fairly accurate. And more importantly, for our purposes, Claude does handle a huge amount of input. If you ever want to learn more about AI tools or talk about them in depth, please reach out. I'm happy to hop on a Zoom chat with any of you to talk more. But this evening, we're going to be answering the question, how might we leverage AI to serve our students far better as we strive to offer systemic and sequential phonics instruction and assess well. This is tonight's agenda. We'll be defining a progression of phonics development. You should end this evening better understanding the relationship between encoding, decoding, word study, and the use of nonsense words. We will be examining assessment approaches for systemic and sequential phonics instruction and designing interventions for phonics development, encoding, and decoding in partnership with artificial intelligence. My hope is that tonight you are not just using AI as a creationary tool, as a tool that helps you develop something. My hope is that in doing this work, you actually learn something from the chatbot that increases your natural intelligence and helps you increase agency for the students that you serve. We're going to start with a check-in. I want you to open a Google Doc and I want you to answer these questions. What do you already know about tonight's topic? And what do you want to know? Feel free to pause the video in order to reflect before you learn. What do you already know, and what do you want to know? At the end of this week's learning, you'll come back to this document and reflect after you learn. I want to know once you're done, what are you still wondering? Explicit teaching is something that we're going to be focusing on with clear intention in this week's work. It's a method where your objectives and expectations are clearly stated at the beginning of a lesson, and the content is broken down into very manageable and predictable segments. Routines are very important here. When it comes to systemic phonics instruction, we try to create predictable opportunities for students to learn and practice, to correct their errors, and to give you the space to adjust on your feet the amount of practice that learners need based on what you discover as you're engaging with them. This approach really relies on ongoing formative assessment, feedback, and coaching around the use of strategies. This is a method that is step by step, and the intention is to help students manage their cognitive load. This is especially useful for students with working memory challenges, executive functioning issues, and those who struggle with attention. The precise language and structured format of systemic phonics instruction lessons also supports English language learners as well, because it helps you reduce linguistic complexity for them with intention. What does all of that mean? It means that when you're teaching phonics, you need to use the same approach every single day. It needs to be a predictable lesson, and the parts of it need to be something that students can anticipate because you teach it exactly the same way every single time. You need to break it into small bits as well so that you can assess one small move at a time, adjust your instruction accordingly, and support English language learners well. I want you to pause here and self-assess. When you think about creating a scope and sequence and aligned curriculum and aligned assessments for systemic phonics instruction, where do you get that from? Where might that be coming from? How do you find it? How do you create it? Take a minute to look at the content on this slide. Pause if you need to. What does explicit systemic and sequential teaching have to do with phonics? Think about everything I shared on the previous slide. Let it soak in a little bit deeper or perhaps differently as you consider the content on this slide. Now I want you to try this. This week, you will be using artificial intelligence to design a scope and sequence for systemic phonics instruction. I'm doing this because I want all of you to know how to use AI in complex, thoughtful, and intelligent ways that increase your natural intelligence, as well as your ability to create a more inclusive environment for your students. I want you to be able to leverage AI to close gaps in the resources that you have been or not been provided in your own school as well. Those of you that are parents should know that you can also use AI to develop a similar scope and sequence that is aligned to the specific needs of your child. So if you're able to conduct an assessment on your child, get a sense of their phonics strengths and needs, you can also use AI to create a curriculum, including decodable readers that align to what you're noticing about your kid. This is exciting stuff. My friend Sandy has a granddaughter who is not reading as well as she would like her to be. And Sandy knows that she has not received explicit phonics instruction in K2. Her granddaughter loves to create stories, though. She draws them and she writes to the best of her ability. She has a whole world of stories in her head. Sandy talks with her about these stories, and now she's using AI to help her granddaughter create decodable readers that target the specific phonics needs that she has. Each of those decodable readers is actually built around a story that her granddaughter imagined herself. Imagine if your child could start telling you stories, building stories, maybe with Play-Doh or Legos, maybe talking with them about them with you over a meal. How might you prompt AI to create a decodable reader out of those stories that incorporates practice around the very specific phonics skills that your child needs? Imagine how much more engaging that might be for them. We're not going to go that far tonight, but we are going to take a wider view. We're going to learn how to prompt craft well and in complex ways so that you are able to create a scope and sequence for systemic phonics instruction. When I coach prompt crafting, I rely on this protocol. I call it the crafts protocol, and I designed it myself after testing it in lots of schools and in a lot of my different classes. If you've had me in for an instructor before, this probably looks a little bit familiar to you. Tonight, you're going to use it in a very specific way. I want you to design a scope and sequence for systemic phonics instruction in grades K through 5 in your region. I want you to challenge the bot to assume the role of a curriculum designer who is creating this document for teachers in his or her or their school system. Ensure that the document is easy to skim and scan by grade level by using appropriate headings and subheadings. Use language that does not assume characteristics, roles, or preferences based on race, gender, age, ability, or ethnicity. How might you challenge an AI chatbot to do this? By copying and pasting that exact language into the bot, adjusting for your gender and adjusting for your region. I use she, her pronouns. And so this is the prompt that I used. Adjust it accordingly. You'll notice if you analyze it that each dimension of the prompt crafting crafts protocol is evident here. This is me doing it for you. Lift and drop it into a bot. See what it produces. Take note of this. Reflect on it. Next, I want you to try thought chaining. Use what you've learned about AI prompt crafting to push your chatbot even further. Now that it's given you a scope and sequence, direct it to revise it. I want you to consider the best practices on the left of this screen. I have given you a prompt already on our previous slide. I want you to try to do it yourself this time. Craft a prompt that challenges an AI chatbot to revise your scope and sequence in order to attend to teaching letter-sound relationships and teaching word patterns and structures. Use the crafts protocol to prompt it well. Here you might notice that you don't gain as much satisfaction from the output of a single prompt. You might find that you need to actually chat with ChatGPT. Prompt it over and over and over again until it revises the curriculum in a way that you're satisfied with, that aligns to these specific progression needs. You might find that you need to pause the video here, that you might need to work out your prompt, craft it and recraft it on scrap paper or in a separate document first before you work with it inside of a chatbot. Take time to do this. Notice how you need to design and refine your prompts and maybe engage in a multi-thread conversation with a chatbot in order to get satisfying results, or what we call output. Revise again. Now direct your chatbot to revise your scope and sequence once again, this time challenging it to incorporate consistent opportunities to teach decoding and encoding in tandem and in ways that support orthographic mapping. By now you should be realizing that prompting a chatbot well is as easy as using the protocol that I've shared, the crafts protocol, and lifting and dropping, copying and pasting some of this technical language into your prompt. Invite your chatbot to include explicit and consistent word study practice. Make sure it's embedding word family work and word sorting work as well. You'll want to pause your learning for this week here again and take some time to look at that output closely. What is AI teaching you about how to support decoding and encoding in tandem, orthographic mapping, and word study? What does it look like to fold that into a scope and sequence? Pause your learning here before you move on. And you're going to revise again. Now direct your chatbot to revise your scope and sequence to include targeted, comprehensive phonics assessments throughout the scope and sequence. Ensure that some of those assessments include the use of nonsense words. We include them in phonics assessments because it's an interesting way to assess students' mastery of phonics skills inside of the use in the interpretation of unfamiliar words that they don't see that often, if at all. They're nonsense words. Here, you're able to understand if they're applying those phonics skills to interpret them. If you are in SED 635, I want you to start another chat, a brand new one. At this point, you should have developed your refined scope and sequence. It should be a document that you either downloaded or perhaps copied and pasted out of AI into a new document. Start a new chat and use what you've learned about prompt crafting, thought chaining, and complex AI prompting to create a set of targeted interventions for your grade level. Interventions should be aligned to each dimension of the scope and sequence you shaped. If you prompt an AI tool in this way, this week's lesson is going to help you emerge with a toolkit that you can use to not only teach and assess systemic phonics skills in a very comprehensive and scaffolded way, it'll also serve as a toolkit of interventions that you can pull on when necessary. How might you use your AI-generated scope and sequence and the information on the right to accomplish this? Pause your learning and workshop this a bit as you do. These are your action items for this week. These are your to-dos, your tasks. I want you to complete that know, wanted to know, and questions document. You began it at the start of this week's learning. Go back to it. Now that you've actually workshopped this scope and sequence and engaged with AI in pretty complex ways, what questions still emerge for you? Share a detailed reflection that outlines your experience using AI and your KWQ and upload both of these things to the single assignment Dropbox for this week. You'll find it on Blackboard. Then I want you to document your learning on Miro by adding a sticky note that answers this question. How did this week's learning influence your thinking about the influence of artificial intelligence within the field of education? Be sure to add a photograph, a screenshot, a video, an audio recording, or an illustration or notes that you took that help me better understand how your learning unfolded this week. Those more multimodal artifacts serve as evidence of that learning, and they are an important thing to include beside your reflection. Reach out if you have any questions. I'd love to talk more, everybody. I look forward to seeing you for our last class live soon.